My name's Kenny with Gardening Simplified, and what I try to do is simplify gardening. And this is part 2 of the series on uh, succession planting. And when you succession plant, a lot of times you have to get your items ready so they're ready to go in the ground whenever you're going to plant. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. What I'm planting today is quite a few different varieties of crops. One is going to be this red Kuri squash. Now, I have put some out in part 1, but this is going into a different section of the garden. It's actually a new section. But when you're planting these, now you can direct sow these, but the thing when you direct sow is you have to worry about pests and such as that, maybe ants cutting your seeds or trying to haul them off, or any number of different things happening. So the easiest way is to just plant them inside, get them started. They'll germinate inside. They don't need light until they start coming up. And to plant these now, and I've said this before, on a squash seed or a pumpkin seed, always just plant the pointed side down. That way the leaves come straight out, it's less problem. Push it down in there a little bit, cover it up, and push it down. Now what I use is a good grade compost, just compost by itself. I'm not putting a couple of seeds there. This actually saves on seeds. If I don't have one germinate, it's not a loss. It's not like I've got to have exactly 18 plants. What I'm going to do, I'm going to plant all my trays, and then I'm going to take and water all these trays at one time, then set them and let these seeds start to come up. It is pretty hot outside. Now sometimes when you're planting seeds, certain types of crops, we're not really into the planting time, but certain types of crops that you plant will, they don't like to germinate under higher temperatures. So whenever I germinate them inside like this, and I germinate them in this climate controlled area, I normally keep it about 78 in the daytime, and it allow it to go up at night, so it gets up to about 82, and which is fine for most seeds, even some of them that like cooler temperatures to germinate. But I can go ahead and get these crops up, and I can get them up early enough. Whenever I do get my bed ready, these already have a start. Now some of these that I'll be planting today, it's time to put them out, but my area isn't ready like this Kuri squash. It's just as easy to do it this way. I'm going to do some watermelon too, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to prepare your starter trays. Also, before I show you the starter trays, one important thing is make sure that you put a label on your crops that you're planting, because a lot of them, especially like my watermelons, I'll have 3 different varieties for my late watermelon season, and there's no way to differentiate between them. So a lot of times, like your brassicas, a lot of them look exactly alike until they really get some size on them and start forming. So make sure that you put a tag so you have them where you want them, because you don't want broccoli and cabbage and all this mixed in, because when you set up a certain amount of area for that crop and you put in another one that's not standard to that size, it can create a problem. They'll grow together, but it's just always easy. Tag your trays whenever you plant them. Now, what I use, I just sift compost. I've got a 1/4 inch sieve, and I just sift my compost. Now, this compost here, as you can see, this is real dry. Now, you don't want to plant in something dry. Now, some of this down here is moistened already. All you got to do, pour your little water in there and mix it up until the whole thing's moist. Don't expect it to start soaking water whenever your seed's in there. You want to be able to pack this down in there. It works best with your compost if it's packed down in your starter trays. It comes out, it holds together better, the roots get in better. A lot of times, depending on what you're using, people say don't pack it down. It's like the seed isn't going to come up. Most of what you use for starting your plants, there's only a few that might be critical to germination and coming out that won't like it to be packed out. Onions are kind of one of those. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to moisten this good. And the reason why I wear these latex gloves is because this stuff here will turn my hands black. But anyway, what I'm doing is I'm mixing this up good enough that it forms a good and solid ball whenever it's put together. This here is some that I just sifted. Now it holds together a little bit, but it isn't quite moist enough. So make sure it's plenty moist. Compost will drop out the extra water. You don't just want it dripping water. You don't want to squeeze a bunch of water out of it, but you want it good and moist. So if you have it moist enough and maybe a drop comes out, you're probably perfect. Now what I'm going to do, I'm using these bigger starter trays. Now there's a lot of different trays to use. These are shallower, and a lot of things I'll plant in here like broccoli and such as that. But these I'm planting pumpkins and winter squash and stuff, and they have a massive root system in a hurry. So what I do, instead of wasting time potting them up, I just go ahead and pot them into a container. Now as you notice, I've got a tray here underneath. This is a drip catcher for like you'd put under your car, which works good in here, even though I still make a mess on my table, but I don't have to worry if I water or something getting out. And I like this little tray here. I don't remember where I got it from, but it kind of keeps my compost and stuff kind of contained. But a lot of people just say just shake it down and you're done. But with compost, it's better to pat each one of these down. If it's real fluffy, there's going to be a problem. Now, in this particular one here, I'm going to plant multiple crops. So what I'm going to end up having to do is mark this in a way that I'll be able to tell what they are. Part of what I'm going to be planting, I have some Big Mac's pumpkin seeds. Now these were from an early crop. What I want to see is if they go ahead and germinate is part of it. I want to make sure they got good germination, and I want to grow a few more pumpkins for this fall. You know, I'm sure the grandkids will love them. And so what I'm going to do now, and I'll just push these down in here a little ways, make sure that they're good and packed in, and then I'm going to go ahead and label each one of these, being, like I say, there's going to be different types of crops in here. So what I want to do is make sure I have labels on each of these, so there's no chance that I get confused. And if by some chance one gets taken out, I'll still know what the rest are. But that way too, I can plant multiple crops. I have a few sugar pie pumpkin seeds left from early in the year, so I'll just finish out the other 5, and I'll stick the rest of these seeds away for later. But like I say, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to put the seeds in there, and then we're going to push them down, and we're going to put the labels on it. It's really a straightforward process of planting seeds when you're dealing with a squash or a pumpkin, because these seeds usually germinate real good. Now I have had some earlier in the year when I planted my Atlantic Giant pumpkins. I had one seed that come up quick and the other one took a couple of weeks or more, and I was about ready to throw it out because it should have already come up. So anyway, that should take care of that. Most of your seed packages have the information as far as plant depth and stuff like that. So that's an important thing. It gives you information on how many days to harvest and all kinds of things like that. Now, some of this other information as far as how hardy plants are, because a lot of these plants will go in through the winter in the south. They'll take real cold temperatures and stuff. You'll have to find that. You can usually Google it. Now I'm going to plant some Brussels sprouts here. And what I've got this little planter. It's not a perfect way to plant, but it lets me, I can be more precise and just put a couple of seeds, because when I try to sprinkle them in there, I usually get a half a dozen seeds in a hole, and this way I can kind of narrow it down to a couple. Now whenever you're planting these, and these are 1/4 inch, you'll just make a little hole here where I'm going to put each one of these, and then I'll take and I'll put a couple seeds. Now some people don't worry about their seeds, they'll just do more thinning. I don't like to do a lot of thinning, and plus I don't like to waste the seeds. I'll just put 2 seeds in these holes, and it's easy enough using this, because I can shake them, I can get them started on the little seeder, and I can just put them in the holes. It takes longer, but I'm not in a hurry. You know, I'm not doing this for production purposes. Whenever you go to plant your seeds, most of the time, like I say, squash and stuff like that, just 1 seed. Now there's always so many of these small ones. I'll do 2, make sure that they germinate, and I'll just pull out the other one. I used to cut them off, but I noticed that the roots kept drawing energy, and it was almost like the plant that was left there was still fighting the ones that were left in there, so it was always easier to pull them out. When you're doing succession planting, and I talked about this earlier in the video, you need to consider your on a lot of your plants your frost date. Now Brussels sprouts take a lot of cool weather. Right off, I can't tell you how cold they'll take, but it takes 90 days to harvest. And understand now, if it's 3 months to harvest from the time you plant these seeds, you want to have some time to harvest. And so you want to get these planted early enough, but some of these plants won't take the heat. And so what we do is, they're fine once they get an established root system, but when you have that little bitty seed, it doesn't have the energy to keep the moisture, to get its roots down, stuff like that. So it's easier to plant this way. Even though you can plant these directly into your garden, it's always a lot easier to plant these in these cell trays. And they have, like I say, they have a bunch of different kinds. I prefer this one here. This tray actually has a big hole on the bottom, so it makes it real easy for me to get my plant out whenever I'm done with it, or ready to start putting them out. Once I start growing these, I'll water these from the bottom. That's why I use a tray that initially I'll just take them out of the tray and I'll water them good. But then once they start growing, I'll fill the weight of the tray, and when it starts feeling like it's lightening up, getting pretty light, then I'll water, and normally I put a half a gallon in a tray. That works out real good as far as for the amount of plants that's in there, and then I won't water again until it starts feeling light. What that does is encourage the roots to go down and get these seedlings to grow. Now, because these won't like the heat, I'll grow these under a grow light. Even though I've got plenty of sunshine, I could try to put these underneath a tree where it's got indirect light. But the thing is that because of the heat, we're pushing mid-90s, it'll be really hard on them, stress them trying to get to grow. Once they get a root system and they get kind of established, I can move these out into a shady location and then just take care of them out there. But initially, until they get a few weeks old, I'll just keep them inside. In part one, we prepared this bed right here that was on the 2nd. Today is the 5th. And you can see how quick the plants start germinating. They got the little corn plants coming up. If you come on down, and I'm going to say this plant is possibly a purple hull pea that come back, but these are the Sunburst Squash. They're all popping up. Our beans are just a little bit slow, but there's a few of them coming out over here too. They're coming up. And then down here we have our red Kuri Squash. Some are just barely trying to come out, but they're on their way. So you can see how fast these seeds germinate. When your temperatures are up in the 90s, like we are right now in East Texas, they tend to germinate faster. But these were the ones that were direct sown. And over here, where we put our cucumbers out for our second crop, and as you can see, these are definitely getting to where they're on their last leg. They're still making a few little cucumbers. There's pickling size cucumbers in there, but these ones here, it'll take about a month and a half, but they won't be long. They'll be producing, and it won't be long I'll have to just take these completely down. Once you have all your seeds planted in the trays, you can, if you have the trays with the covers, which I'll show you in a minute, you can put them on. If you don't have covers, just use saran wrap and lay you a piece over the top, and you should see moisture inside, a little bit of moisture. It should look a little fogged up, which it's hard to tell with the lights on. Now I won't keep the lights on until the seeds start to germinate, and then I'll turn them on. But if you have the ones that have the covers like this to make a little greenhouse, then you can use those. But if you don't worry about it. Just use cellophane. It works just as good. But what you're going to do is, this is going to keep the moisture in. Now, when you check them, if it takes them a longer time to germinate and your moisture starts coming out, so you don't have as much, just take a spray bottle and spritz the top of it. Now, a lot of people worry about algae growing on top. Don't worry about algae, especially if you have grow lights, because it tends to grow more when you keep your plants watered like they're supposed to. Even if you let them dry out, it's not a sign of overwatering them. But anyway, these should be up pretty quick. Whenever you're getting ready to figure your crop for succession planting, just like the seeds that I planted in part 2 of this series, you need to make sure, and I stress this in part 1, but you need to make sure of your frost dates. Just like you would in the springtime, you want to make sure that you don't plant before your last frost or your average last frost date, because unless you're just going to risk it and know that you might, the possibility that you might lose your plant. But it's the same thing when you're planting at the end of the season. When you plant a crop, you want to make sure that you're going to actually get production off that crop. And if the crop says it takes 60 days to produce, that's 60 days to start producing. And if, say, it's green beans and you might have 3, maybe 4 weeks of good production, then you want to normally do those 90 days ahead. Now, if you just want to risk it and you don't have that much time, you can risk it, and even possibly if you start getting the frost towards the end, you might use fleece or something like that as a row cover to increase your harvest time on that, so that the frost doesn't get it. Down here in the south, a lot of times and more often than not, we have pretty mild temperatures, and so sometimes I might risk planting a plant. But a lot of your brassicas, and this is for we're in 8B, but even when you get up into 7, now when you get further up north in 4 and 5, you're going to have some kind of row cover to protect these crops. The whole idea of this series is to understand succession planting and plan your planting cycle. It takes a little bit more work for me. I don't like to schedule things, but as far as I want certain crops, and normally I might not grow them. The summer season gets pretty long, and a lot of us don't think about our fall crop. It's like me now. I'm be glad when my tomatoes die. I have a few tomatoes that will be left, and which will keep producing, and my cherry tomatoes, of course, they don't mind the heat, they keep on going. But a lot of times we're ready for that crop to be over. I've harvested my summer crops. I have a lot in the freezer, but there's certain crops that grow better in the fall, and especially here in the south, because we don't have, everybody thinks that when you're in the south you have a real long growing season, so you can just plant. But we also have a lot of hot and dry time during the summer. Like right now, we're lucky, and it's kind of like a microclimate to our area. We get a lot of rain, but it's like right now the rain it either goes north of us or it goes south of us, and it kind of leaves us dry. Well, when your soil conditions are such as ours, that right here, that you have a real sandy soil, you lose the water in a hurry, you lose your nutrients in a hurry. So a lot of times a crop that up north, it would produce real good once you get it in, a lot of the colder weather brassicas and stuff, because your growing season's long. What happens here, if you don't get them in just right, they end up starting to bolt and go to seed before you ever get a harvest off them. And that's an important thing in succession planting. You don't want to plant them too early, that the heat's going to kill them, but you do want to have them ready at that time. And there's, of course, my chart is kind of, it's been written on, but this is a general chart. This one here is, it's from Texas A&M, and it's for the area around here, and it just gives me general ideas of most of your main crops. A lot of things that aren't normally grown as staples around here wouldn't be on this list, so I have to approximate, maybe because of the crop family that they're in, or maybe I'll kind of look more of where they're grown and kind of get an idea and go off of that time to plant these crops. But what happens is, a lot of times, like we sow certain crops at a certain time. I'll give you, for instance, here, we sow our fall broccoli starting the 1st of August. Well, we can do that all the way through the middle of September, but it's not sowing seeds, because how hot it is at that time, your seed will never survive. That's why I plant in containers. I could either hope that there would be the variety, or there would be a supply of broccoli sets that I could purchase, which would cost me a lot compared to seed, because for less than it cost me to plant 6 or buy 6 plants, I've planted 100, you know. So understand the cost is different. Of course, you have to time these seeds to where they're going to be ready to plant at that time. Because what happens is, like I say, it's too hot to get a seed to come up and to germinate and make it, because it's so hot. It doesn't have the root system. It can't get its roots down enough to support its green growth. So what happens, it starts out and then it withers and dies. Well, when you plant a seed and it's in a controlled environment, maybe you got it in a high tunnel or a greenhouse or something, you have shade cloth over it to keep the amount of sun down, or something like that, to where you get your crops up, just like a lot of the growers do, where they've got fans going in there to kind of keep it cooler. You know, if I was to plant these outside and we're getting mid-90 degree temperatures, yes, it'd come up in a hurry, but certain types of crops, they're not that strong of growers whenever they're young, so they would just wither and fall over. So that's the reason why when we succession plant, we consider when we're going to want to plant. In a lot of areas, you would be able to put just a seed in the ground and have it come up. But you have to know the climate in the area that you're at, and you have to know microclimates. Like say, a lot of areas here north of us, they're getting a lot more rain. South of us, they're getting a lot more rain. But our little microclimate here, we're not getting the rain, so we've got to be able to deal with that. And when you're watering, and even with a drip system, you have to get enough water there to saturate the soil, because it's dry all around. I mean, your bed's there, but it's everywhere else is dry that you're not watering, so it's going to leach that water out. So you need to consider that when you're planting these seeds. You need to time your plants to where they'll be ready whenever you're ready to plant. Now, a lot of mine are right on schedule. Some are a little late. They're not that much late, but they're late to where I should have already had something to put in some bare spots where I've already harvested out. But with everything that's going on, converting, a lot of times we get so busy doing our other things in our garden. Know how plants respond to the temperature, so you know which ones that you got to be critical on your last frost date. Like for us, we could plant a second crop of tomatoes right now. And the thing about it is, it's hot, but as long as you water that plant, it's going to grow, and by the time it gets to where it cools off enough to where blooms will set and stuff, that plant will be mature and be able to put on fruit pretty quick. So you have to know your date. Know how long it takes a plant to grow, and produce, because right now, the plant you're planting, you're going to have how many days to harvest, and then you're going to have some weeks after that for plants that have a longer harvest time, such as squash or say tomatoes or whatever. You have to have enough time for them to produce, succession of fruit on that plant. So, you don't want to say, I've got 60 days to the average frost date in the fall, and you plant that plant 60 days ahead, and then you maybe get some fruit and it's getting ready to set more, and then the plant just dies. It'd be like green beans, they don't take 45 to 60 days. But you would want to be able to have a few weeks of time of the continuous harvest off of that plant. So take that in consideration whenever you succession plant. Take and get you a chart. You can get it off the internet. Just take and Google garden planting guide and put your city in there and state, and there'll be multiple choices to get them. A lot of them are this form here. This is kind of easy because it just gives you a shaded area where when it's planting time, and it on its little tapered where the week before or the week at the end is not the best time. But you don't have to go strictly by this. A lot of these I plant early. If it's like when I planted my broccoli in the spring, I planted it late because my seeds, I ordered them late. But I wanted to experiment, so I actually knew when I grew the seed how long it took me to get a transplant. And that's what gardening is. It's always an experiment. Don't just plant the same plants all the time. You know, try something new. You might not like it. Maybe your neighbor likes it. You can give it all away. But take and try these and grow these. You'll find that you'll enjoy gardening a whole lot more. And don't, I make it kind of sound like it's complicated, but it's really not that complicated. If you're in an area and it's too early to plant, but you have the space, go ahead and prepare your bed. If you're not going to be able to plant after this crop, go ahead and put you down a ground cover or some kind of mulch to protect your soil and the organisms in it, so you'll have a better soil when you start out your next planting season. Realize I'm doing this in July, but you can use this same information whether you're in the spring, whether you're in the fall. You can use this information. It can be used throughout the year. I know this video was just a little bit long, but there's quite a bit involved in it. And if you think this video could help someone else, just take and share it. If you liked it, go ahead and like it. And if you want to see more of my videos, just hit the subscribe and hit the bell button so you'll be notified. Happy gardening.